Hey everybody, so I'm outside in my little garden area, which is kind of fun. I actually have a garden area in the new place that I'm living. And sadly I have to mar this beautiful garden and day to talk about Nazis. I love this country and my job. Anywho, the reason that I want to talk about Nazis today is because of a recent news story surrounding a march that happened in Orlando, Florida, where a group of white supremacists in very clear Nazi garb decided to come out and do a demonstration where they yelled things like, "We are everywhere, white power, and Heil Hitler." You know, things that Nazis like to do instead of having a picnic or, just being chill. Now, none of this should be particularly surprising or new to anybody who's been paying attention over the last few, months or even years here in the United States. This has been an ongoing, growing problem of neo-Nazis feeling more and more emboldened, both in the United States and around the world, due to the rising fascist rhetoric that has been espoused in a lot of these places. In particular, in Florida, where Ron DeSantis has been doubling down on a lot of fascist legislations and rhetoric in his governance. And that's one of the major reasons I wanted to briefly talk about this, though there is a much bigger reason that I'll just mention at the end of this video that we'll get to. But these neo-Nazis feeling emboldened to march here showcases how a lot of what, Ron DeSantis is doing in that state ultimately makes these people feel like they can be out in the streets and do whatever the hell they want without any pushback. They feel like, it is much more accepted in our society. Things like Ron DeSantis's Don't Say Gay bill, the active targeting of trans people, trying to get names of trans people and make lists of trans people, Nazi shit that Ron DeSantis has been doing in his state, targeting mainly queer people. But then also the racist stuff that he has been doing as well, trying to force schools to downplay the teaching of systemic racist issues, trying to say that slavery had benefits for the slaves. This idea of upholding this idea of American virtue as, we may have done bad things in the past, but we're good now, and ultimately was all for this greater project. Everything that we have right now is good, actually, because of the horrible shit that we did, even though we're trying to say it's ignored now, but we want to say that, it influences us today in a positive way, but we don't want to have any acknowledgement that this horrible thing that we are saying is in the past is actually, gonna have effects on today in a negative way, but only good ways. It's, again, you could just go round and round in circles with the very clear hypocrisy and bullshit that is just baked in the narrative of this stuff that ultimately all upholds this, idea of America being this great thing that is underscoring the fascist underpinnings that this country continually tries to deny, despite the fact that it is very much foundational to what this country is. It is even more kind of important to recognize that these Nazis were marching in Orlando, Florida, because there's been this move by a lot of groups in Orlando, namely Disney, of all people, to try and say, despite all the crap going on, Orlando is a safe place for queer people. When you can just clearly see there are Nazis living there. It is not a safe place for queer people. And it's really sad because despite my problems with Disney as a corporation, I do have fun going to Disney World. I went there a lot as a kid. I want to take my partner who has never been there as well, because I do have fun there despite, it's being very corporate. I'm allowed to, be a little bit hypocritical in enjoying corporate-made media for fun every once in a while. But I can't do that because it is clearly just not safe. I mean, even Canada has put up travel awarenesses to queer people coming to the United States, anywhere generally, but especially places like Orlando, Florida. And it just goes to this attempt to try to hide and downplay the very clear things that are happening in this country to ultimately to push up, corporate interests. It's like, don't worry about the rising fascism, queer people. Don't worry, about all this racism going on here. It is totally safe for you to come to a place where Nazis are to spend your money. We want you to spend all the money, so just ignore your personal safety, because all you should worry about is upholding the capitalist machine and distract yourself with, pretty colors and Star Wars is to come and play in our fascist aesthetic playground without understanding the, fascism in this area. Yeah, that's another whole thing, how you get to play act, being in a fascist state in Disney with stormtroopers running around. That's a whole other discussion for a video that I'm actually working on my main channel coming in hopefully a little bit. And so this ultimately just showcases the interaction between, capitalism and fascism, as well as, the two groups that sort of represent these two things ultimately. The Republicans, which have gone further and further fascist by upholding these sort of, underpinnings of racism, eugenics, colonialism that this country was built up upon, and the Democrats, who are, you know, ultimately much better than Republicans. I don't want to ever like say that they're the same exact thing, but are also neoliberalists. They uphold capitalism. Like, Democrats and Republicans are never going to try to tear down capitalism, which is ultimately what gives them their place in society, both of them. And while Democrats are not willing to necessarily peddle in the overt fascism that Republicans are doing, they are still willing to try to uphold capital and what it does, and that ultimately tries to underplay and downplay the very real dangers of fascism rising. It's how they both sort of work in conjunction with each other, unwittingly so in many cases for the individuals who are part of that system, to ultimately just proffer up the growing fascism in places around the world, and specifically in states like Florida and Orlando. This is ultimately why institutional Democrats, and I want to, you know, emphasize the institutional part, because there are, you know, local level and, you know, state level Democrats and people and individuals, even in, you know, federal government, that are doing their best. But the sort of institutional Democrats and the sort of Democrat Party as a, you know, function of, you know, the neoliberalist and governmental system that we're currently in, are ultimately always going to be ineffectual in fighting fascism, because they're not going to ultimately attack the root of what fascism is ultimately trying to uphold. They're both functions of the same system that are, you know, wheel going around each other and are certainly not the same thing. And I would always vote for Democrats. I always will support Democrats over Republicans in, you know, an election, but ultimately knowing that that is not going to upend this system. They just keep going in this weird wheel because they're not going to try to, either of them, destroy the thing that all of this is ultimately serving: capitalism, as well as the other things that underpin a lot of capitalism, like colonialism, and all the things that come with it, like, you know, sexism, racism, homophobia, etc., etc., etc. And so ultimately, to me, these Nazis marching in Orlando, Florida, being very vocal about, you know, their fascism and their shitty beliefs and their just shittiness as people, just underscores all of this stuff going on in our entire country right now and around the world generally, as we can also see in like New Zealand and stuff, and how it all centers on, you know, racism, you know, anti-Semitism, you know, homophobia, transphobia, all of this stuff, and how it all interjoins with fascism and neoliberalism working together. But all of this is very interesting and important to discuss and is symbolic by all of this. But there was actually a much bigger reason that I wanted to discuss these fascists marching in Orlando, Florida. And that is that they called this march the March of the Redshirts, calling themselves Redshirts. And, you know, I saw that and I couldn't help but think of one thing, because, you know, as a Trekkie, we all know what happens to red shirts. And I don't really feel that bad about it.